It began with a sealed legal briefing delivered through a private entrance at Clarence House, one so sensitive that even senior aides were reportedly denied access altogether. But the moment King Charles III emerged from that closed-door meeting, pale and visibly shaken, palace insiders knew something catastrophic had happened within the inner sanctum of the monarchy. What had once been dismissed as mere tension inside the royal household was suddenly transforming into a devastating constitutional and family crisis, a silent storm tearing through the emotional geography of the crown. And at the absolute center of it all stood Queen Elizabeth II's final will, a document carrying an immense, unspoken authority that threatened to rewrite Queen Camilla's future at the Sandringham Estate forever. According to whispers now spreading through the highest levels of royal administration, the meeting itself had been arranged under conditions so secretive that even trusted household staff were reportedly instructed to leave entire corridors empty, clearing any potential witnesses from the private quarters. Solicitors connected to the late Queen's personal estate allegedly arrived through a side entrance normally reserved for security-sensitive government briefings or foreign dignitaries, triggering immediate concern among palace observers who had already sensed weeks of unusual, icy tension surrounding the management of Sandringham. At first, press offices and royal aides reportedly attempted to dismiss the growing speculation as routine legal housekeeping tied to the late monarch's vast estate management, but the heavy, suffocating atmosphere inside Clarence House quickly told a very different story to anyone paying close attention. Insiders claimed the king listened in near-total silence as the final interpretation of Queen Elizabeth II's will was carefully explained line by the senior legal advisors, revealing strict restrictions that allegedly stunned even those closest to the monarch himself, shattering long-held assumptions about the family's future security. What made the situation especially explosive was not merely the legal complexity of the property laws or the financial intricacies of the will, but the enormous emotional weight attached to Sandringham itself. For generations of British sovereigns, the sprawling estate had never been viewed as simple private property or a mere holiday home to be bargained away. It was regarded as sacred royal geography, deeply woven into the emotional fabric of the monarchy and the fundamental identity of the House of Windsor. Reports suggest that Queen Elizabeth II viewed Sandringham not as a residence to be casually inherited through marriage or shared among consorts, but as a protected sanctuary tied directly to the continuity of the royal bloodline and the future stability of the crown. And according to several royal commentators now quietly discussing the matter, the precise legal wording allegedly created invisible, unbreakable barriers around the estate that prevented Queen Camilla from ever securing permanent independent authority or long-term occupancy there beyond King Charles's lifetime. The reaction inside the ancient palace walls was reportedly immediate and defensive. Senior staff members were allegedly instructed not to discuss estate matters with journalists under any circumstances, while public relations teams moved rapidly to suppress growing rumors already leaking through elite royal press circles. Yet, despite the wall of absolute silence erected by the institution, the deep internal tension became completely impossible to hide from the household staff. Several insiders described King Charles as emotionally shattered after hearing the final legal interpretation of his mother's arrangements, with one palace source reportedly claiming the king appeared completely blindsided by the strength and permanence of the restrictions tied to his mother's final decisions. That emotional devastation reportedly deepened once the broader, more chilling implications became clear to everyone in the room. Because this was not simply about a house, nor was it even about a standard financial inheritance. It was about institutional legitimacy, historical permanence, and the painful, haunting realization that Queen Elizabeth II may have spent her final years quietly shaping the monarchy's future from beyond the grave, ensuring her ultimate vision remained untouched by modern compromises. Queen Camilla, according to various interpretations of events now circulating through high society royal circles, was equally stunned and deeply wounded by the revelations. Those familiar with internal palace dynamics suggest she had long believed Sandringham would naturally remain an integral part of her royal life, a place of personal influence and security following Charles's accession to the throne. Instead, Whispers began spreading that the late queen had allegedly designed succession protections specifically intended to preserve the estate exclusively for the direct line of heirs, rather than future consorts or extended family factions who might alter its traditional purpose. The news reportedly traveled quickly to Prince William and Princess Anne, both of whom were quietly and formally informed before much of the wider royal household even understood what was truly unfolding behind the closed doors. That specific detail alone triggered a fresh, intense wave of speculation inside the palace offices. Why were Princess Anne and Prince William informed so early in the process, and why, according to several bewildered insiders, did neither appear remotely surprised by the strict legal outcome of the briefing? As those questions spread through private offices, grand drawing rooms, and exclusive press corridors, another rumor began surfacing with increasing frequency among the staff. Some palace insiders now whisper that Queen Elizabeth II had been meticulously planning this defensive legal strategy for years. Long before the public ever noticed the fractures inside the modern monarchy, long before King Charles's serious illness transformed the immediate balance of power within the family, and long before succession tensions intensified behind closed doors, the late queen allegedly understood exactly how vulnerable the institution could become if sacred royal assets ever drifted too far from the direct line of continuity. And if those whispers are true, then what unfolded inside Clarence House that afternoon was not an accident, a legal misunderstanding, or a minor oversight, but the cold activation of a strategy quietly prepared long before anyone realized what was coming. But the real shock for the current household was not simply that Camilla had been denied permanent control. It was the profound reason why Queen Elizabeth allegedly put these restrictions in place, building hidden legal tripwires into her final arrangements to ensure that the private heartbeat of the monarchy could never be redirected by outside influence. For decades, Sandringham was more than a royal estate. It was the private heartbeat of the monarchy itself, a sanctuary guarded fiercely by Queen Elizabeth II long before the modern royal wars ever began. Purchased during the reign of Queen Victoria and transformed under Edward VII into a deeply private royal sanctuary, the estate carried emotional weight far beyond its sprawling grounds and historic walls, representing a refuge where generations of sovereigns retreated during moments of triumph, grief, illness, and institutional uncertainty. For Queen Elizabeth II especially, Sandringham represented continuity itself, the place where family traditions survived political storms, where Christmas gatherings reinforced the public image of unity, and where the monarchy's oldest instincts about loyalty, hierarchy, and bloodline were preserved behind closed gates. According to several royal commentators, the late queen did not simply love Sandringham. She protected it with an almost spiritual intensity, viewing it as a symbolic trust passed carefully between generations, never fully belonging to any one individual, no matter how powerful or beloved they became. That is precisely why the latest revelations reportedly sent such massive shockwaves through royal circles, signaling a cold, enduring quietness where the absent queen's final strategy appeared to endure exactly as intended, unyielding, invisible, and impossible to overturn. The profound silence that settled over Clarence House following the legal briefing was not a temporary state of shock, but the heavy beginning of a permanent institutional realignment that left King Charles III visibly worn down by the compounding pressures of his historic role. As days turned into weeks, the absolute precision of Queen Elizabeth II's final will became the defining axis around which all private palace discussions strictly revolved, creating a subtle but undeniable emotional distance between the monarch and his queen consort. Courtiers watching the daily interactions behind closed doors reportedly noticed that the tension was never loud or explosive, which in the delicate world of royal diplomacy made it far more unsettling and deeply difficult to manage for the senior staff. Instead, the crisis manifested in long, heavy silences during private dinners, separate legal consultations with individual teams of solicitors, and conversations that reportedly ended abruptly whenever the future management or funding of the Sandringham Estate surfaced in conversation. Those closest to the daily operations of the household allegedly feared that the king was being pulled in two completely impossible directions at once. forced to navigate a heartbreaking battlefield where his deep devotion to the woman who had stood beside him through decades of public scandal and personal sacrifice collided directly with the unyielding institutional machinery his mother had spent 70 years fiercely protecting at all costs. For Queen Camilla's inner circle, the newly uncovered restrictions surrounding Sandringham symbolized something far more devastating than a mere logistical adjustment or a standard estate planning safeguard. They viewed it as a final, definitive rejection delivered from beyond the grave by the one sovereign whose complete approval could never truly be replaced or negotiated. In the long and rigid history of the British monarchy, access to sacred properties has always been the ultimate symbol of institutional acceptance and legitimacy, meaning that residences are never viewed as simple brick and mortar houses, but as physical manifestations of rank, permanence, and historical belonging within the bloodline's protected center. The painful realization that Sandringham might ultimately belong not to the current queen consort's legacy, but emotionally, symbolically, and legally to the next reign, reportedly struck at the absolute heart of Camilla's deepest, long-held insecurities about her permanent place inside the modern monarchy. As private unease rapidly transformed into full-scale anxiety behind palace walls, public image concerns began heavily eclipsing the private emotional crisis itself, forcing senior public relations advisors into a state of high alert. Palace officials were reportedly terrified that any visible fracture, cold gesture, or sudden change in scheduling could easily spiral into another catastrophic media war at the worst possible moment for the family's public standing. King Charles, already facing immense personal and physical strain while battling a serious illness, was said to be under unimaginable pressure from the institutional machinery to prevent this deeply personal family conflict from breaking through the barrier of palace secrecy and becoming a public spectacle for global tabloids. Every single public appearance suddenly mattered with an intense gravity, and every shared expression or carefully measured interaction between the king and queen was scrutinized by experts, because the palace administration understood a dangerous historical truth that public sympathy can shift with terrifying speed when royal vulnerability suddenly collides with raw questions of inheritance, legitimacy, and deliberate family exclusion. At the exact same time, Prince William and Princess Anne reportedly maintained a deliberate, masterful public silence, refusing to engage outwardly with the growing media speculation or offer any reassuring statements through standard royal press channels. But behind the heavy oak doors of the private offices, insiders allegedly claimed that both figures were increasingly and sharply focused on consolidating long-term stability around the future architecture of the crown, moving with a calculated precision that sent a chilling message throughout the wider royal circle. Their quiet, relentless coordination made it absolutely clear to all household factions that the future transition toward the next era of the monarchy was already being meticulously organized and fiercely protected from any current emotional fractures that could weaken the institution's global standing. For experienced courtiers watching these events unfold in real time, the haunting historical comparisons to earlier royal fractures became completely impossible to avoid, bringing back memories of exile, institutional exclusion, divided family loyalties, and dangerous succession anxieties that had previously haunted the House of Windsor for decades. Some senior advisors privately feared that if these deep, wounded resentments ever managed to leak into the public view, the monarchy could face a devastating cycle of internal warfare capable of consuming the public's trust for a generation, because royal history has proven time and again that the most destructive battles are rarely initiated in the public eye, but rather begin in the complete silence of wounded pride, hidden beneath ceremonial smiles and flawless public protocol. This hidden architecture of control, built so carefully by the late queen during the twilight years of her reign, began revealing its true containment strategy line by line, proving that she understood a brutal truth better than anyone else alive. Monarchies do not collapse overnight from moments of public outrage or political upheaval alone. They weaken slowly, eroding from within through emotional compromises, private favoritism, and the dangerous blurring of lines between personal desire and institutional responsibility. It was this exact foundational philosophy that shaped every major legal and private directive Queen Elizabeth II signed before her passing, ensuring that while the public remained focused on magnificent ceremonies, historic handshakes, and superficial family dramas, the structural integrity of the crown itself was being insulated by an impenetrable web of legal protections designed not for the current reign, but for the generations still to come. Sandringham had transformed into the ultimate symbolic battleground between personal attachment and institutional duty, a place where King Charles III increasingly found himself trapped within boundaries his mother had established decades in advance, forcing him to confront the agonizing reality that even as an anointed sovereign, his personal desires were entirely subservient to the survival plan designed for the endurance of the crown. As the final legal assessments reached their definitive conclusion, the atmosphere inside the royal residences shifted from acute crisis management into a cold, permanent acceptance of an unyielding reality that no one within the modern household possessed the power to overturn. The true magnitude of Queen Elizabeth II's final move began to dawn on palace officials, revealing that her intricate planning was never directed at Queen Camilla as an individual, but was rather a grand institutional masterstroke designed to protect the monarchy from its own internal vulnerabilities and contemporary fractures. For decades, the late monarch had observed with a sharp, historical perspective how great dynasties throughout global history did not collapse from external political pressures alone, but crumbled slowly from within through small emotional compromises, unchecked private favoritism, and the dangerous blurring of lines between personal desires and historic duties. It was this precise realization that drove her to spend the twilight years of her historic 70-year reign quietly transforming her private estates into legal fortresses, ensures that the direct line of succession remained completely insulated from future remarriages, changing family alliances, or shifting internal factions that might threaten the crown's ultimate continuity. Nowhere did this hidden architecture of survival become more physically visible than behind the frost-covered gates of the Sandringham Estate, which transformed from a simple family country retreat into an absolute legal symbol of the monarchy's unforgiving, ancient rules. King Charles III reportedly found himself utterly trapped within this multi-generational framework, forced to accept the painful limits of the sovereign power he had waited his entire lifetime to inherit, realizing that the crown does not bend for individual happiness, but rather demands absolute emotional sacrifice from those who wear it. Surrounded by senior courtiers who firmly advised him to prioritize institutional stability over personal affection, the aging monarch, already heavily burdened by the profound physical strain of his ongoing illness and intense public scrutiny, had no choice but to surrender his own wishes to his mother's enduring blueprint. This subtle shift in power dynamics inside palace walls became increasingly isolating for Queen Camilla, who, despite maintaining her public title and ceremonial position beside the king, found the structural weight of the institution moving decisively away from her sphere of influence and aligning firmly with the next era of sovereign leadership. Members of her inner circle reportedly watched with growing anxiety as future-centered administrative discussions completely sidelined her long-term role, confirming her deepest fears that her historical relationship with Sandringham would ultimately remain a temporary chapter rather than a permanent legacy within the sacred geography of the Windsor bloodline. What made this historic transition so hauntingly unique was the profound, heavily managed silence that followed the resolution of the crisis, an absolute refusal by all major family factions to engage in any open warfare, public complaints, or visible press briefings. Instead of explosive public statements, the institution settled into a quiet, cold stability where every official and family member understood the final outcome perfectly without the need to speak a single word aloud to the global media. Behind this wall of absolute composure, Prince William and Princess Anne emerged not as aggressive challengers to Charles's current authority, but as the relentless, cold guardians of their mother's original intent, representing the ironclad continuity of the old guard securing the stability of the next reign. Princess Anne's influence, rooted in her legendary discipline and uncompromising commitment to duty before self, became a crucial anchor for the palace administrative teams, reinforcing the foundational truth that personal sentiment and modern family compromises can never be allowed to override succession security. As public sympathy quietly gravitated toward King Charles, viewing him not just as an anointed sovereign but as a son living under the permanent, unyielding shadow of a mother whose strategic foresight refused to fade even after death, the preparations for the future William era began accelerating through pure institutional inevitability rather than open family crisis. The crown had once again proven its ancient, survivalist nature, reminding every occupant of the throne that the monarchy was never designed to function as personal property or an emotional sanctuary, but as a sacred, historical trust passed carefully across generations, untouched by the temporary grief, pride, or desires of the individuals who passed through its grand corridors. And as the winter wind swept across the ancient royal walls and quiet fields of Sandringham, the late Queen's final defensive strategy stood completely victorious, silent, invisible, and utterly impossible to overturn, ensuring that the heartbeat of the British monarchy remains fiercely protected for centuries to come.
At the same time, Prince William and Princess Anne reportedly maintained deliberate public silence, refusing to engage